Today's lesson is about using percents to calculate simple interest. Simple interest is something that everyone's going to be dealing with later on. If you live in a house or plan on living in a house, then your mortgage loan, if you've ever heard about a mortgage loan from your parents or friends, mortgage loan is, hey, who can afford to buy a house outright in cash? I know I sure as heck couldn't. So I had to borrow money from the bank, and that money that I borrowed from the bank was the principal. It's the amount of money that I borrowed. And the bank said, yeah, we're going to loan you some money, but we're not going to loan you the money for free. We need to make some money off of the money that we gave you. So we're going to charge you an interest, or the interest rate. The interest rate is the percent of the loan. I think mine at the time was 3.25%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but to borrow money for a house, you're borrowing a lot of money, and so 3.25% adds up to be quite a chunk of change. So principal was the amount of money I borrowed from the bank to buy my house. The interest rate was the amount that they decided that they were going to charge me to make money on that money. And then the interest is the amount of money that the bank made. So that would be the money paid at a certain rate for the use of borrowed money. Now, interest isn't always, a bad thing, as in I'm having to pay money for borrowing money. Sometimes it's a good thing. If you have a checking account, sometimes the bank will say, hey, yeah, you're depositing $100 into your bank account. Well, it's not just going to sit there gathering dust. We're going to use that money. We'll credit your account. We'll say, yes, this is your $100, but we're going to use it to pay other people, to invest, and we'll pay you some money. We'll pay you interest just for letting us house your cash. So interest could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing depending on the situation that you have. If you're borrowing money, then usually you have to borrow it with interest. So you have to pay it back and then some. If you are putting your money in a bank account, then you are going to earn interest. So it's like free money. I mean, goodness, who wouldn't love free money? So double sides to interest there. Okay, so there's a simple interest formula, and I like to call it IPERT. So we have iPhones, we have iPads. Well, here in Mathland, we have IPERT. That would be, I stands for the interest, and the interest would be, again, the amount of money that you have to pay back on top of the amount that you borrowed, or the amount of free money you earn for letting the bank house your cash. Principal is the amount of money that you started with in your bank account or the amount of money that you borrow. Rate is the percent of the agreement. And that rate, since it's a percent and we're plugging it into an equation, that's the same thing as when we're using the percent equation. We're not going to plug in a number with a percent sign. So we're just going to go ahead and change that rate into a decimal. So this rate should be written as a decimal. And then the last one would be time. The longer you're borrowing the money, the more interest you're going to pay. Or on the flip side, the longer you leave your money in the bank, the more money you're going to make. Now, there's only one warning about time, is that it has to be written in years. So if you're given something in months, you got to write the number of months over 12 to figure out how much time that is in years. Let's go ahead and practice calculating the interest. So when I'm given the information for my principal, my interest rate, and time written in a list like this, it's really pretty easy to solve this problem. As long as you know your formula, IPERT. I equals principal times rate times time. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and plug in the numbers that we know into this equation. So I'm looking for the word interest. Do I know any of my interest? And I'm not talking about interest rate, I'm just talking about interest. Since I don't, I'm going to go ahead and write my I equals. So this time I am solving for I. My principal is 2,000, so I'm going to write my 2,000 times my principal rate, which is 6%. Don't forget to change this to a decimal. If you don't, the answer that you get will be 100 times bigger than the answer that you should get. And if you're borrowing money, you don't want to be owing 100 times more money than you really do. So change that percent into a decimal. Okay, and then we know time is 4 years. We've got those three numbers. We're going to go ahead and multiply them together to find that out that over the course of 4 years, if I borrow $2,000 at 6% interest, that I am going to owe an additional $480. So just because I'm borrowing that $2,000 doesn't mean that I don't owe it back. So if I had to find out how much I owe at the very end of all of this, so principal plus interest, I would overall owe $2,480. I want you to go ahead and try this next one. Calculate the interest. You're given the principal, the interest rate, and the time, but be careful. This time the time is written in months, so you've got to do a little bit of extra math. Go ahead and pause the video, give it a shot, and then play it again. Okay, so we have I do not know my interest, so I'm going to leave the I equals there. My principal is 400. My rate is 300 because I need to write 3% as a decimal. And then I have 3 months. Well, what the heck am I going to do with 3 months? I'm not going to put in a 3 because if I do, then I'm going to be thinking that the equation is going to think that it's 3 years. What I need to do is put in 3/12. And if you think about 3/12, 3/12 simplified would be 1/4. So 3 is a quarter of a year, and that is a decimal that you should know. And if you don't, it's okay. You can plug in fractions, or you can do 1 divided by 4 in your calculator and find out that 25 hundredths is that decimal. So when you go to plug in the numbers into your calculator, go ahead and do 400 times 300 times 25 hundredths. That stands for $400 that I borrowed, my principal, at 3% interest rate for a quarter of a year, or 3 months. When it's all said and done, I'm going to owe a whopping interest of $3. That means that at the end, when I pay everything back, I would owe $403. Or if you took this into, if you change this problem's context to the fact that you deposited $400 into a bank account, then with a 3% interest rate, then after 3 months you would have made $3 for just letting your money sit there. So your balance at the end would be $403. Okay, let's go ahead and practice this information with a real-world problem. Isaiah borrowed $1,500 for a used car. He plans to pay back the loan in 3 years. His interest rate is 8%. How much will he pay back in interest? The toughest part about these problems is understanding what the numbers mean. So when you're borrowing, that $1,500 is what you start with. That's the principal. And then the 3 years, well, that's your time. That would be your T. And your interest rate is 8%. I'll go ahead and change that to a decimal. Principal, we know, is our P. Time is our T. And our interest rate is our R. We're going to need to figure out how much he's going to pay back in interest. So we're going to go ahead and do I equals IPERT. Interest equals principal times rate times time. I'm going to plug in my 1,500. Multiply it by my rate written as a decimal. and then multiply it by my time in years, the 3. Plug those things into a calculator, and I find out that that Isaiah is going to owe, on top of the $1,500, an additional $360 just in interest. When he's done, what the total amount that he'll pay back, well, he's got to pay back that $1,500. It's not free money, unfortunately. And he has to pay back, it's kind of like a rental fee. The interest is a rental fee. He has to pay back $360. Add those two together, and that $1,500 is now $1,860 that he owes. So I hope that helps understand what simple interest is and how to find it. You take your principal times your rate times your time, and that's that.